This is Diddy Kong. He's a really good fella. He's Donkey Kong's best friend. He bravely conquered Crocodile Isle. He became a world-famous music artist due to the power of enchanted bongo drums that earned him millions of coins with his cover of hit 'em up style Oops by Blue Cantrell. And he's a famous video game hero who's gone on a bunch of little adventures of his own, rising his star in the video game world. Most of these are merely implied in strategy guides and instruction manuals, forging lifelong friendships with Timber the Tiger, Banjo the Bear, and Conquer the Squirrel. But one of those adventures would unite all of these parties in a challenge of galactic proportions: Diddy Kong Racing. Which would be a lovely thing to say if it actually happened.
No!
Except that it did, but not really. And maybe Tiny Kong was there and this elephant was British.
Hello, friend.
There is a strange temporal void in Diddy Kong Racing's wake. Once reported to be the most pre-ordered game in existence, a top 10 seller on the Nintendo 64, a competitor to the kart racing throne that Mario Kart 64 sat atop, and Crash Team Racing deserves to permanently live in, now an inaccessible memory. What was once a game that bridged entire worlds together would go on to erase that connection as those worlds drifted impossibly far apart. Except when they don't. There's a lot of confusion as to who exactly owns what in Diddy Kong Racing, what games and projects emerged from it, what the legacy of this game was, is, and could have been, and what all the different realities the existence of one little monkey both caused and denied. And in a world where people love to destroy basic narrative connections with a lust for what is canon, I feel partially responsible for this. I'm not very sorry. I like my reading. The curtains can be more than blue. I thought it'd be a fun time to see just where a ravenous fan base, a constantly changing studio, corporate takeovers, and the strange naming scheme of dinosaurs can take us in establishing what some could consider to be Donkey Kong lore. This is all that was, all that could have been, and all that nebulously might be in the multiverse of Diddy Kong Racing.
Press start!
DKR was sort of a scramble of a project. What started as a caveman time travel game kept its basic dinosaur aesthetic and transformed into a go-kart racing adventure game called Wild Cartoon Kingdom. We got the basis for what would become DKR's adventure mode here. Animal racers going around a theme park-like area that housed race courses, bumping into mascots, walking around to do stuff, cheerful colors and characters, you get it. Originally, this was to star Timber the Tiger and serve as a revival of Rare's old RC Pro-Am brand. But plans changed as Rare's marquee game for 1997, Banjo-Kazooie, wasn't gonna make its projected holiday release like what was being touted at E3. Pro-Am 64 was incredibly far along and had impressed Nintendo execs behind closed doors, but Pro-Am wasn't exactly a brand Nintendo was chomping at the bit to make their big holiday seller. Nintendo had already locked down a lucrative holiday ad campaign with Taco Bell, planning to use Banjo as the flagship. And while they did shift gears and make it a Nintendo 64-themed campaign instead, they were gonna need someone with a little more star power than Timber to helm their holiday release. So, Nintendo offered Rare any one of their characters to be slotted in as a guest star, who just so happened to have the game named after them in order to push more copies. Rare's choice was the character that they made for Nintendo, who represented their partnership more than any other: Diddy Kong. And just like that, bada bing bada boom, Diddy Kong Racing was announced and would be out on store shelves less than 2 months after being shown off in the pages of Nintendo Power. But Rare wasn't just gonna leave the original star in '97 high and dry. Banjo was also included as a playable racer alongside Diddy, Timber, and the rest. In fact, Banjo was so special that he was personally invited by Diddy Kong, the superstar simian sending both him and Conker the Squirrel handwritten invitations sent out by Squawks the Parrot in the game's instruction manual, and being called Diddy's good friends who met him on prior adventures. Before they were even properly conceived, the worlds of Banjo-Kazooie and Conker were merged into one contiguous universe with Donkey Kong. But it was always a weird, fractured one. Diddy Kong Racing was self-published by Rare, with a majority of the ownership of the game remaining with the British developer. The only exceptions were the game's trademark title and 3 characters: Diddy Kong, Banjo, who was originally made to be a Nintendo-owned IP, and Crunch the Kremling. Because his design was close enough to a generic critter, I guess I will never escape him. Why does this video keep getting views? This put Conker specifically in a very weird place. The squirrel was primed to be Rare's own self-styled platforming mascot with the upcoming 12 Tales, also a self-published venture. But he was part of Diddy's new continuity in spite of not being owned by Nintendo in any way. If, for whatever reason, Conker became unsuitable for Nintendo to mention for legal or content reasons, there'd be this really weird gap where Conker could say whatever he wanted about that one guest star he went go-kart racing with, but Diddy would just kinda have to ignore it and let Conker remain cancelled, thus creating this weird crack in reality that essentially depended on Nintendo and Rare being bosom buddies forevermore. But this would only be the beginning. Other characters amongst the Diddy Kong Racing cast were weirdos too. Pipsy was a straggler from an earlier Rare concept, Astro Mouse, redesigned from a Bucky O'Hare-style space adventure into a cute little acceleration demon. Trans icon? We love to see it. Tip Top was an original character for DKR, a nervous little turtle who hated driving, but ended up stumbling headfirst into being a Banjo character, having cameo appearances in both Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, and making it kinda unclear who even owns the guy. This wasn't helped by Tip Top being ridiculously popular in the Rare fandom for pretty much no reason?
I like your face, guy.
Thank you.
Got a very soothing face, and I like looking at it.
Like, Banjo and Conker were obviously getting games after DKR came out, and Timber had rumblings that he might be doing something, so it was like the most insular Smash speculation of its day to be like, who else from Diddy Kong Racing should get their own video game? And the frontrunner was Tip Top, the guy constantly being mentioned in Rare's mailbag section, Scribes, with reactions like,
Tip Top rules! Make a whole game about him! I got the Tip Top fever!
And the other day, I went to the store and said to the clerk, I would like to purchase Heaven and Shell, Tip Top 64, please. The clerk gave me a funny look and replied, we don't carry that. That was when I realized Tip Top didn't have a game. Scroll a little bit here, and I admit I made some rash decisions before writing this letter. My original plan was to force you to make the game through... Wow, you could just say that before 2001. There's also a whole flashback sequence, like, Tip Top fans have a narrative. Thanks, Eric. Rare even asked in their response to this, boy, what makes Tip Top so beloved? And got a response the very next month. There was a weird devotion to Diddy Kong Racing's cast that, for whatever reason, would not go away. And that was true even inside of Rare. They did not forget how Diddy stole Timber's spotlight. They had great affection for their little pal racing around his dino domain. Lee Schuneman's team at Rare, or at least the ones that weren't off making Jet Force Gemini, wanted to launch Timber back in time, exploring a prehistoric open world in a game that would end up pretty similar to Ocarina of Time. Timber's adventure on Dinosaur Island would be bigger, bolder, greater, and he would be accompanied by one special friend, a younger version of Tricky the Triceratops, the first boss from Diddy Kong Racing. However, as the scope of the game and the story it wanted to tell expanded, the childish Timber was phased out in favor of two new protagonists, Saber and Crystal.
Tough luck, kid. Maybe next time.
This little dino island evolved into a high-concept sci-fi adventure, the title officially being revealed as Dinosaur Planet. And you can actually still read like a pretty thorough plot summary up to the final boss. It's got wizards, and Saber dies because of a dragon, and they use time travel to save him. It's the good schlock. But the technical limits of the Nintendo 64 pushed the game further and further back until simply releasing it on the upcoming GameCube was the better and probably more technically impressive call. Additionally, representatives saw this adventure and, again, went, you know, if you used a Nintendo IP, this would probably sell better. Also, this Saber guy kinda looks like Fox, so... you know... Zip Zam Zoom, game Star Fox Adventures now, complete with hastily put together R-Wing sections.
Then there's no time to waste.
And while I'm not crazy enough to suggest that Timber digivolved into Fox McCloud as his final form, I am exactly stupid enough to point out that Tricky survived this entire process. From start to finish, the little Triceratops that could made it from Diddy Kong Racing spin-off to final Star Fox product. And even stuck around past that, growing up and reappearing in Star Fox Assault to shame Fox for not doing it with Crystal yet.
I'll take care of things here so you two can come back on your honeymoon.
What are you, nuts? We're not yet.
The final designs of these Trickies would obviously be leagues apart. But if you really wanted, you could say that, yeah, these are the same guy, or at least related. Tricky just evacuated Planet Saria after the events of Assault and settled down in Dino Domain. Star Fox is a prequel to the entire Donkey Kong series. It just makes sense.
I have to go now.
Dinosaur Planet.
Needs me.
So, we got Diddy, Astro Mouse, Conker, Banjo, and Star Fox all chilling in this weird soup of relativism. But then there's also the oddity of what could have been. Diddy Kong Racing is a game that technically spawned no sequels or follow-ups, with the GBA sequel Diddy Kong Pilot being reworked into Banjo Pilot, and the GameCube follow-up, Donkey Kong Racing, being reworked into Saberman Stampede before quietly being cancelled. But a lot was made along the way. You may know of this early screenshot of a character tentatively known as Redneck Kong, who was quickly taken behind the shed after better taste prevailed. But do you know an even more iconic Donkey Kong character to add than Redneck Kong?
Bowser?
This earliest version of Diddy Kong Pilot featured the 5 most important Mario characters, all of which were planned to have individual stories, as highlighted by this cool pilot version of King K. Rool. In his story, he finds the ancient city of El Dorado and has to prove himself doing little quests for these spirit dudes, including Nikiki, who is the actual answer for the most obscure Donkey Kong character because he doesn't have a Mario Wiki article yet like Ringo does. Also, the Kong Genie was real. If we can get more art of the Kong Genie in the world, that'd be neat. But would you believe me if I said this was potentially not the first ditched portable Diddy Kong Racing sequel? You don't care? Too bad! In that same Tip Tup fanaticism we shared earlier, Rare staff said to look out for Tip Tup in 1999. However, no game starring the talentless turtle, their words not mine, would appear in 1999. So that was just a bit of a misnomer. Perhaps an insanely enthusiastic projection for how fast the then upcoming Banjo-Tooie or Grunty's Curse would come out. That is, until this sketch was shared decades later by Ed Bryan, showing off some early prototypes of the Banjo-Kazooie box art, drawn over a listing of what the company planned to show at E3 1998. You got some self-deprecating humor on how Joanna Dark looked like Lara Croft, frustration at how Donkey Kong 64 was turning out, and for our very hyper-specific purposes, 2 titles at the very end. Conker DMG and DKR DMG. Internally, these were flags for games handled by the Game Boy team, and while Conker's Pocket Tales would emerge just fine, we didn't get no DKR GBC. However, we would receive a Game Boy Color racing adventure game by Rare in 1999. It was just a little more mousy.
Ha! This sure is swell!
In the late 90s, Nintendo struck a deal with Disney to publish multiple games featuring Disney properties. A very Yamauchi move, as Nintendo had licensed Disney characters in the past to dominate the Japanese playing card industry pre-video games. This is why this random Mickey GameCube game was published by Shigeru Miyamoto despite being developed by Capcom,
leaving a whole lot of questions that don't need to be answered.
Many of the required Disney projects were given to Rare, resulting in Mickey Speedway USA being developed out of the Diddy Kong Racing engine, and Mickey's Racing Adventure, which, while never outright confirmed to be the unheard of to this point DKR Game Boy game, is Racing Adventure mode. They said the Mickey stuff was turned around 6 months. It's that. Now, normally this wouldn't matter at all, just a cute bit of trivia. Except if you're particularly insane, you'll be able to track down the Game Boy team's trademark in the Really Rapid Rapids course. The Rare Cow. Most Game Boy Rare games post Donkey Kong Land 3 have at least some effigy of the Rare Cow inside, be it graffiti, cave drawings, or loading screen elements. But only Mickey's Racing Adventure and the Game Boy Color version of Mickey Speedway USA have the actual physical Rare Cow. Every game. Except for Conker's Pocket Tales, the debut of the Rare Cow, and undeniable proof that Mickey Mouse and Conker the Squirrel share the same universe, reclaiming Mickey as a Conker character as God intended.
There is no escape. There is one over the mouse, and he has depression and a drinking problem.
Oh my god, he's f***ing losing it entirely.
Fun stretching of what constitutes as an in-universe appearance or a cameo aside, that's as far as Diddy Kong Racing can go. In 2001, Conker's Bad Fur Day came out, and not wanting to trick Grandma into buying her kids a game with the cute fuzzy squirrel from that little racing game before realizing, oh no, he's got a body count and a libido! Nintendo asked for DKR to be quietly taken off store shelves. Diddy certainly wouldn't be associating with his drunkard friend ever again.
Well, ask this to you then.
And after 2002, Rare was bought out by Microsoft after Nintendo declined to purchase them, with Rare gaining the Banjo and Killer Instinct IPs from Nintendo, and Nintendo receiving full ownership of the Donkey Kong and Star Fox characters that Rare had made. This means that Nintendo has always owned the Kremlings. Anyone who says different has always been wrong. Like, Nintendo didn't ask Microsoft if they could borrow Claptrap to appear in the swimming pool of Mario Party 7. This left Diddy Kong Racing in an odd space. All of the characters inside were technically not Donkey Kong characters outside of Diddy and Crunch, due to the previously mentioned copyright exception. And the fact that if the DKR cast was all Donkey Kong characters, Tip Top would be in a weird limbo where both companies owned some version of him.
Watch out!
This also means that both Nintendo and Microsoft own a character named Tricky who is a Triceratops who teamed up with an ace pilot to beat an alien invader that tried to brainwash him, which is very quirky. This basically left Diddy Kong Racing as a dead end for Nintendo, a DK game that they couldn't do much of anything with unless they wanted to ask permission for every racetrack. Like, Greenwood Village was just in Jet Force Gemini. What were they going to do? Buy that too? They don't want that. Rare, though, they had most of the pieces necessary. They could have fun with this.
This is gonna be interesting.
The first mention of Diddy Kong Racing post-buyout came in the hype cycle for Conker, Live and Reloaded. As the foul-mouthed squirrel prepared to make his bid to be the cute animal mascot of the Xbox, or at least sell better than Bad Fur Day had a few years earlier, he did a fake press release to plead his case, mentioning that he doesn't associate with those Diddy Kong Racing freaks anymore. One of them is in jail now. Years later, Rare's website revealed that Bumper the Badger was the freak in question.
Oh no!
Arrested for public indecency and jailed until Super Mario Wiki asked about him in 2021. Apparently, he's on parole and is apologetic for his actions. Don't trust him. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts also has Banjo reminisce about that time he last raced vehicles with a genie and a pig, and references Diddy Kong Racing by name as one of the quiz questions that the Lord of Games tosses out in the expected Banjo trivia section. As much as Diddy is unable to recognize his own continuity, Banjo gladly continues to reference it. That letter from Squawks back in the day as much a part of him as his sister that he hasn't seen since 1998.
Yahoo!
If it even happened to Diddy, that is. Because this happened.
But I don't think you're real. I don't think any of this is real.
As Microsoft didn't have a handheld system to compete with the Game Boy Advance or Nintendo DS, Rare's handheld team was free to basically continue existing and make games for Nintendo. This led to remakes of the Donkey Kong Country trilogy for the GBA stuffed with new content, Nintendo deciding, actually Diddy Kong Pilot doesn't look great, we don't care, causing it to turn into Banjo Pilot, It's Mr. Pants, a game about the mascot for Rare's website surveys, please respect him, and Nintendo and Rare's final collaborative project, Diddy Kong Racing DS. Now this game makes more questions than it answers. The copyright for the game claims music and scenario this time for Nintendo, so it's not clear if the Big N owns the whole soundtrack or just the DS version soundtrack, including all the new compositions. They can't own all the racetracks, otherwise every copy of Jet Force Gemini would have to be edited and...
leaving a whole lot of questions that don't need to be answered.
But most confusingly is the removal of Banjo and Conker from the game, replacing them with Dixie and Tiny Kong. Now, Conker getting the axe makes perfect sense. He's a nasty boy no matter how you slice it.
She's gross.
But Banjo is a bit more curious. Rare had no problem shoving their own creations into other people's licenses. Jetpack is an intrinsic part of Donkey Kong 64, despite Nintendo never owning that game. And even post-buyout, they just shove the decapitated head of Saberwolf into Cranky's cabin for no reason. And beyond that, Tiny Kong has clearly gotten older since she was last seen in Donkey Kong 64. Which is important because Diddy Kong Racing came out before Banjo-Kazooie, since Banjo had yet to begin his partnership with Kazooie. And Banjo-Kazooie platforming games happen in the year of their release, because Jam Jars confirms that it's been 8 years since Banjo had a game in Nuts and Bolts, and Logbait's comments about the contemporary gaming scene of the time, meaning that Nuts and Bolts has to take place in 2008, which means that Diddy Kong Racing needs to have happened in 1997 or earlier, but DK64 happened in 1999, which is likely because Donkey Kong Country 2 happened when Killer Instinct was in arcades, so DK64 has a very limited amount of time from 1995 onward in which it could happen, which means that Diddy Kong Racing DS can't have happened in 1997, which means that either two identical adventures, except for Banjo's existence, happened in 1997 and 2007, or that we've created an entirely new universe where everything is the same, except Banjo is Tiny Kong now, and... Look, I know we're being extra silly today. In the grand scheme of things, none of this matters except being annoyed when someone says, "It was nice for Microsoft to let Nintendo have K-Rool for Smash Brothers," or wondering why there aren't any Diddy Kong Racing remixes in it. This is, at most, a fun little thought experiment. But that's just what makes fiction special, right? Diddy Kong Racing used to represent this partnership between two companies. A fragile and tenuous thing kept together by handshake deals that played so fast and loose with the worlds they were making Where one started and one ended was nebulous. Because of that, Diddy and Banjo were friends. Easy to imagine just being an island or two apart from each other in some sort of vast archipelago, hanging out and telling each other about their adventures when the games weren't playing out. And the potential of that partnership was massive, spanning different teams and ideas and companies and universes. Not just as little cameo appearances or they fell through a portal and are here now, but as worlds shaped by and framed around these influences. As we approach a world that seems absolutely obsessed with the idea of crossover, I'm finding that these little organic connections, the moments where a character from beyond weaves themselves into a world where they feel like they could have existed all along, where they have history and rapport and camaraderie and feeling with all the denizens of that world, to mean so much more than them just showing up to play the hits. And when that gets twisted, I just think it's fun to unfurl how far you can stretch that and see everything you can possibly encompass. Or just go on DK Vine and have them tell me about the further depths of the Donkey Kong universe. Props to that entire site for basically preserving my memories of when my childhood heroes were friends who always had each other's backs. If you have any other examples of this kind of thing, please let me know. I love when we live in a world beyond cameos. When branches and what multiple series could be sprout because of a Taco Bell ad deal. When we get to explore something as wonderfully stupid as the accidental multiverse of Diddy Kong Racing.
Yippee! Let's party!
Think you're the only hero in the world? Mr. You become part of a bigger universe. Who the hell are you? Nick Fury. I'm here to talk to you about the Red Initiative.